Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will be, talking about chapters 3 and 4 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We had talked about before how Victor Frankenstein has this really idyllic childhood. He grows up, he is well loved. His parents even adopted a little sister for him. And by the time we get to chapter 3, Victor, is brought up in wealth. He's sent to the best schools. He's got a best friend in Henry Clerval. He's got this young sister, Elizabeth Lavenza, who he's devoted to. He's got two younger brothers, Ernest and William. And everything has gone well up until the age of 17 in his life. But it's at the age of 17 that things start to change. As he describes at the beginning of chapter 3, he decides that at the age of 17, he's going to head off to college, like so many of our students will be doing. And he's going to be going to the University of Ingolstadt in Germany. So again, he grows up in Geneva, Switzerland. He's going to be going to college in Germany. He's excited to study science and alchemy, which was part of the earlier unit. And he's all set to go. But a few months before he is set to head off to college, he experiences the first, as he describes here, the first misfortune of his life, an omen, as it were, of my future misery. And then he gets into this story. Elizabeth had caught the scarlet fever. Her illness was severe, and she was in the greatest danger. During her illness, many arguments had been urged to persuade my mother to refrain from attending upon her. She had first yielded to our entreaties, but when she heard that the life of her favorite was menaced, she could no longer control her anxiety. She attended her sickbed. Her watchful attentions triumphed over the malignity of the distemper. Elizabeth was saved, but the consequences of her imprudence were fatal to her preserver. On the third day, my mother sickened. Her fever was accompanied by the most alarming symptoms, and the looks of her medical attendants prognosticated the worst events. On her deathbed, the fortitude and benignity of this best woman did not desert her. She joined the hands of Elizabeth and myself and said, "My children, my firmest hopes of future happiness were placed on the prospect of your union. This expectation must now be the consolation of your father. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to my younger children. Alas, I regret that I am taken from you, and happy and beloved as I have been, is it not hard to quit you all? But these are not thoughts befitting me. I will endeavor to resign myself cheerfully to death and indulge the hope of meeting you in another world." So, of course, Elizabeth falls. It starts with Elizabeth Lavenza, his adopted sister, who falls sick with the scarlet fever. And even though all the doctors tell the family stay away from her, she's highly contagious. Um, Caroline Caroline can't do it. She loves Elizabeth too much. This is her daughter, and so she attends and takes care of her daughter. And in doing so, she nurses Elizabeth back to health. But then Caroline herself contracts the disease, and she cannot recover from it. And so here, at the age of 17, Victor suffers the first shock of his life, the death of his mother. And notice how when she dies, on her deathbed, she takes the hands of Victor and Elizabeth and puts them together, and she says, "Look, my future happiness was built on the idea that one day you two would be married." And I know that's weird to think. I know it's weird to think about, like, Victor's going to marry his adopted sister, and that is a little creepy. But this was at least Caroline's hope that these two would eventually be married. And remember how at the end of chapter 1, how Victor viewed Elizabeth, mine to love and protect, mine to take care of. And so Victor's kind of always thought of the idea that he would eventually marry this woman. Um, but here he suffers the first tragic death, um, the first tragic death in his life, the death of his mother. And this puts Victor in a very interesting situation. Um, he does defer going off to college by a little bit, but he does decide that he is going to go away to college. And I think for many people, if they'd experienced a tragedy like this, they might put off for a longer term going off to college. And yet Victor decides that his way of coping with the loss of his mother is to go throw himself into his work, something that's not uncommon for many of us. And so he does. He runs off to college immediately. And now you got to imagine this situation. Remember, Alphonse Frankenstein, his father, was older, was like in his 40s when he started his family. So at this point, Alphonse Frankenstein's in his upper 50s or into his 60s. His wife has died, and now Victor's running off to college, which essentially means that Elizabeth Lavenza, at the age of 17, has essentially become the head of the household. She now has to take care of an elderly Alphonse and the younger children, Ernest and William. So this puts a great deal of pressure upon Elizabeth as Victor runs off to college here. Um, and Victor describes, this part here. Victor describes that Elizabeth veiled her grief. She indeed veiled her grief and strove to act the comforter to us all. She looked steadily on life and assumed its duties with courage and zeal. She devoted herself to those whom she had been taught to call uncle and cousins. Never was she more enchanting at this time, when she recalled the sunshine of her smiles and spent upon us. She forgot even her own regret in her endeavors to make us forget. It's interesting that Victor, in the moment that he sees Elizabeth essentially playing the role of his mother, Victor's like, man, never was she more enchanting to me than at that point. A great example of the Oedipus complex at play here, if you are using a psychoanalytic lens to view this text. And so Victor does head off to college. By the way, Clerval is not allowed to go. Clerval's father steps in. Clerval wants to go to college too, but Clerval's father says, basically, you don't need college for the jobs that I'm going to have you do. Clerval's of a lower social class than Victor. So it's like, you don't need to go to college. You don't need that education. And so Clerval's not allowed to go, which has an impact on this as well, because now Victor, still grieving over the loss of his mother, heads off to Germany to go to school on his own, where he's going to be isolated and alone. And that's going to be a problem for Victor, obviously. It's not a good idea when you are grieving over the loss of your mother to find yourself isolated and alone. So you will see in this chapter, Victor heads off to college. One of the first things he does is go to meet one of his professors, is Professor Kremp. And Victor immediately tells Professor Kremp, he's like, oh my goodness, I've been studying alchemy. I've been learning about the elixir of life and the alchemical process. And immediately, Professor Kremp rejects him. He's like, are you kidding me? Why would you study this sad trash? No, you need to take biology and chemistry and physics like we do today. And again, this is just another instance in the story of a father figure kind of rejecting Victor. And so Victor, of course, he does find some sympathy in Professor Waldman, but for the most part, Victor has to continue his studies of alchemy on his own. And so what we now have is a situation where by day, Victor goes to class at the University of Ingolstadt. He goes and he studies chemistry and physics and biology. But then by night, he's secretly held up in his apartment doing experiments on alchemy, trying to discover the elixir of life. And it's important you understand this. The question people should be asking is, of course, why is it that, Victor Frankenstein would bring a monster to life? And the answer is simple. If Victor can discover the secret of life, if he can discover how to give life, can he not then also prevent death? Can he not prevent the death of his other loved ones as he is grieving for the loss of his mother? And I want you to remember that. It's important and ironic later that Victor starts this whole endeavor in chapter 4 of creating his monster with the idea that if he can create life, can he not prevent death, and most specifically, the death of the rest of his family? And so chapter 4, you will see Victor begin his creation of the monster. You will see him assemble the pieces, take a close look at where he gets the pieces for his monster. You're going to see him digging up graves and his reaction to digging up the graves. And so he goes out, he starts to collect the pieces. He wants to do these experiments. Can he discover the elixir of life? Can he discover the secret of animating life? And the only way to do so, obviously, is to experiment. As he says, no one can conceive the variety of feelings which bore me onwards, like a hurricane, in the first enthusiasm of success. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. New species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I shall have deserved theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought if I could bestow animation upon the lifeless matter, I might, in the process of time, although I now found it impossible, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. Look at this paragraph. Victor's like, if I can succeed, I might create a whole new species, a whole new race of monsters who will bless me as their creator. This is Victor playing God. I think I can create a species and they will worship me. And if you know anything about romantic literature, think back to Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner or any of the stuff that you would have read prior to this, you know that man trying to play God, he of course is going to be punished for this hubris. But again, Victor here thinking that he can bring life, that he can play God here. And so over the course of chapter 4, you will see him go through these torments as he is slowly assembling the pieces of his monster, putting it together so that he can do his experiments and try to bring this thing to life, something that we will see happen when we get to chapter 5. So again, I hope that I hope that you are doing well. I hope you are enjoying the text. Please email me if you have any questions, and I will talk to you